Hello and welcome to 10 Very Big Books, a Malazan read-through podcast. My name is Peter Bond, and with me today is ISKAR JARAK.
Hey, Pete.
How you doing, buddy?
Feeling good. I'm glad to be back. This is a fun book, and I can't wait to get into it. They've all been fun, but they seem like they're getting funner and funner.
Yeah, so that's me and ISKAR here have been doing our little spin-off Esselmont miniseries. So here we are talking about Stonewielder, and stoked to get into it. This is the third book in the novels of the Malazan Empire, and it's set within the Corelli Fist kind of subcontinent, in and around the Stormwall, and all this stuff. We'll get into it. I'm eager to hear what you thought of the book, ISKAR. For me, I really bounced off this book hard the first time I read it. And I think it's because coming after Return of the Crimson Guard, I read the first three Esselmont books integrated into the main series when I'm on my first read-through. Right. So I read Return of the Crimson Guard after Reaper's Gale, and I was like, oh my gosh, all this Lycian stuff, all this, it's so integrated into what I thought the main story was. There are all these characters I know, and ditto with Knight of Knives, And then so I read this book right after Toll the Hounds, before book 9, and I think I was really disappointed and frustrated that it was not as integrated into like what I was imagining the main plot to be. And I was like, well, why did I just why did I just read 600 random pages about this other stuff? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And you're looking for the crossover.
I was looking for the crossover, and I was very frustrated and very let down, and I think I kind of didn't like the book for that reason, I think I had active disdain. Obviously, that's kind of just a matter of expectations, right?
Sure.
And I think it was actually a huge relief going into this book to be able to reapproach it, knowing that it's like, well, the point of this is not like, it's not just about the crossover. There is some crossover. There is an element. I was talking with a guy, we'll get to his comments later, about the crippled god part of it all. But really, this book is a kind of separate own thing, Yeah. We talked last time about Esselmont kind of stepping out, stretching, and writing a bigger story in Return of the Crimson Guard. But here, I think even more so, we are like fully away and almost exclusively dealing with characters Esselmont created in this realm that's been pretty much untouched.
Yep.
We're kind of off on our own planet that Esselmont wrote.
Totally.
I'm excited to get into this book. What did you think of it returning to this time? And did you have that kind of bounce off I talked about on my first read through?
Yeah, I think that this was the first book where I realized that it wasn't a companion series. You know what I mean? Where,
Yeah.
Because I think that was kind of how I read the first two books, because I didn't integrate. You know what I mean? I went through the Book of the Fallen, and then I found out after the fact that there was this, author shared world whole deal, and so I read Knight of Knives, and I was like, okay, this is like the prequel kind of deal, right? And then I read Return of the Crimson Guard, which was like, this is kind of like adjacent companion story, and this one, like you said, this is its own beast. I even you have to bust out the maps, because you're like, what is Fist, what is Coral, right? Like,
you definitely need the maps, because I have no sense of the geography of this place,
Totally. And like, even like going back on a reread, I was like, man, I really wanted to have that map there too, because it's like a big part of it, and it's also flipped, right? Because he writes it backwards. So like, what was east and west for Greymane was the opposite for, and so it's like, but no, I loved it too, because it kind of does stand on its own. It is its own thing, and it was just entertaining on its own, regardless of, and especially that first time, I didn't get a lot of the crossover. Going back now, and I kind of was reading for that. I was like, so where's the crossover? It's like one of these people, and I guess you do get that at the end of this book, but I was looking for more of like, who are, these are obviously people under aliases, and it's going to end up being so-and-so's, but and no, it was just its own deal. But going back through and just being able to relax and kind of know that, I was able to really just enjoy it, because there's a lot of action, and there's actually a surprising amount for what it appears to not have a lot of crossover value at first glance. I think on the reread, you get more of the tie-in with the main story, especially on the crippled god side.
So I had this conversation because I wrote up a little thing on Reddit to get some questions that we'll talk about later, and I had that same thing. I think, of course, the lady is this, blah, 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 crippled god, blah, blah, blah. But I just think, especially compared to how Return of the Crimson Guard or Knight of Knives is integrated with the series, it's a pretty different thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the only kind of major piece, because it's not even that explicit. I've had people who read Stonewielder in the Discord who didn't even totally connect the dots on the crippled god chunks, like chaining, aspect to the lady or whatever. But
yeah,
that like is actually the kind of huge spoiler, really, for the crippled god endgame, right? Because they go after the pieces and free them or whatever, and that's the kind of deal. And so, like, it's a small piece of this book and a small piece of the crossover, but it's it's kind of the biggest piece.
No, I think you're right, and I think that's why some people put it in that reading order, so it kind of just, you get that scent of what's going on with going into the final two books.
Yeah.
But I feel, which is kind of a separate subject, but we kind of dipped into it, but I sometimes feel so strongly that maybe Return of the Crimson Guard should be read with the main series, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just because of the Lysine half of it. However, that is as far as I would go. I would never, this book certainly, in my mind, does not need to be read at all in the main series.
Yeah. It stands on its own totally. And the only continuity really is with mostly Return of the Crimson Guard,
Absolutely. Anyway, so let's get to the book in total. We're kind of dancing around it. I'll tell you this. I didn't love the book, but I think I wasn't as actively riled up about it because of this change in expectation, Yeah. There's characters I like more than others, and, I really loved Ivanar's story in this. Some of the military stuff kind of left me in the cold. I love doing the Kiska and Leoman stuff. We'll talk all about that. I liked kind of getting to the end of Greymane's story. I like Kyle in this book. They kind of have a weird role reversal thing. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. He's grown.
Yeah, it's a change in dynamic from when you meet them in Return of the Crimson Guard.
Right. Yeah, and they've aged, so it's kind of cool. They're a little bit more mature, but they're not totally mature either.
Yeah, you kind of touch in with them almost at a different phase in life, you know?
Yeah, they're now in their 20s or whatever, and they're past their 18 whatever phase. And
yeah, and Greymane, I think when he's introduced in Return of the Crimson Guard, it's here's Greymane. It's a big deal,
Yeah.
And then
he's kind of mysterious, and you don't really see him much.
He's still a big deal in this book, but clearly he is more tired, and he's kind of on this death quest. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, he's a broken character at this point. I mean, he's pretty jacked up, He was pretty much giving up back at his little dueling school or whatever it is where you start out with him.
Yeah. Do you think that change in those characters, how do you feel about it?
It's interesting. I like the Greymane stuff because to me you humanize this mythological character kind of, because especially coming from the Book of the Fallen, you don't have a lot of Greymane references, and they are just kind of legendary references more or less. And so I always like the peeling back. I think that's a theme that he's had through all these books, is it's you look at these people and they're, yes, they still have that kind of level of badassness and whatever, but they're also pretty jacked up and have all these issues type people. And I like the whole history and the connecting of the dots with a lot of the old folks, the old guard that he was with during the first invasion and stuff like that, and just kind of seeing man, it contextualizes a lot of the Return of the Crimson Guard stuff too, right? And his which I think is cool to get that backstory, and you find out why you see this kind of husk of a man who's hollowed out from his former self, and then he's just got this kind of resigned mentality. On the Kyle and Kiska side, I like it because I've always liked them, and I think they've more matured. I do think Kyle, I guess he got the benefit of training with Greymane the whole time, but he did step up in a pretty G'd up way in terms of power levels between Return of the Crimson Guard and here.
Oh, it's totally different. And that moment when he's when Greymane promotes him is kind of comes out of nowhere, and he is kind of out of his depth in that way, but he does kind of rise to the occasion.
And he has that group breeding, you know what I mean? Because he comes from that stalker Coots kind of he grew up on that same type of area and whatever. And
yeah,
he could run 20 miles and whatever in the Return of the. So he wasn't a pushover by any means, but he's definitely a lot more G'd up.
Definitely. To touch on what you're saying, I do think in this we see more how much the history of these past Malazan campaigns and him in the army weighs on Greymane, especially in regard to his relationship to Rillish and just the greater military apparatus, and what's his role in it? What's his role in relationship to the command? What's his role in relationship to the soldiers? And it's changed over the years, and him taking over and becoming Fist here, like, what does that mean for Greymane is like a question he clearly grapples with within the book.
Yeah, definitely. He's struggling to, I think he's trying to, and he kind of gets there in the kind of end game that he was like, there was like a destiny element to it, or there was like this kind of preordained path that he was on and was resisting. And that's like the, reason. It's kind of like I'm reading through Memories of Ice right now, and Ganos, like when he becomes the master of the deck, he's resisting and it's creating this infection and it's making him even worse. And that's like, symbolically happening to Greymane throughout his life. And I also like that it's like, in some ways he was the villain, or the betrayer or whatever, who kind of gets humanized in a way, although he's still kind of a dick to everyone. But, Rillish is the opposite, right? Because he was like the hero who like did the morally right thing by siding with the Wiccans and going against his own to do the quote unquote right thing. And then you see like, yeah, he kind of threw Greymane under the bus and he regrets it and feels bad for it. But man, did he have to pay for that?
It's kind of interesting that Greymane is introduced as like the betrayer, right? And then but you clearly see he's not like the worst person. But I don't really think the book ever gets to a position where it's like uncomplicated about Greymane. It's still, I think, like he's kind of this dude, and I don't know. I don't view him unambiguously as a great dude. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
And I think that's interesting.
Totally. And even at the end, right, where he like has his big, right before his big redemption moment and all that, they were still like, dude, we can't just like storm they're already set up there, right? And he's like, nah, just go. You know what I mean? And he's like, all these boats, he's like, just storm that beach. They're all right there. And if it wouldn't have been for the Ruse high mage, then they would have been done for. But he's like, yeah, this is what it's got to be. Just go for it. And there's just like total carnage. So it's like, he's not an angel by any means.
No, he is not. What I mentioned a few that I stand out to me. What are some of your characters you really liked in this book? I'm
a sucker for the military, like the Band of Brothers aspect. So like I was super down for Sooth or Seth or whatever. I like that story because he's kind of like the Kyle,
sure,
of the Return of the Crimson Guard book, who he's kind of like the noob who comes in and he has to like get schooled in the ways of the world. But I like the whole squad dynamic with like him and Carrie and the jealousy angle with the Barghast scout that he has to go out with when him and Kyle go out, and just Wes, who's like the guy who sleeps all the time. So I just like that whole squad dynamic stuff, and he becomes like a much more well-rounded character, and he's still that dude is a badass because he goes up against those Stormguard and it's totally awesome, but he becomes more like kind of wise and reserved and against just all out battle, and he's definitely not in the kind of tape measure pissing contest that he was in at the beginning. So I like that one.
That's interesting. I think I agree. I mean, I have no particular beef, but I think for me I don't know, sometimes the Band of Brothers stuff is not my bag, as you put it. But I think it was well done, and I do like... It's important to have that point of view, because if it's only the commanders, I do think there's a loss,
Yeah.
Especially in this kind of new setting like this, right?
Totally.
I think for me, Ivanar was like the light and soul for me of characters in this book, really. I mean, I love the Kiska stuff, and we'll talk about it, but out of new characters that are introduced in this book, every time we are talking about Ivanar and the Army of Reform and what they were doing and what was happening to them, and I found myself kind of perk up, and I was so... I don't know. Something about that character and is like... Sometimes the hesitancy, characters who are hesitant to do the thing,
the reluctant hero, yeah.
Yeah, the reluctant hero, sometimes I'm just like, you're like, get over it. I need, like, let's get the story going. Do you mean, please continue the story?
Yeah.
But there was something about Ivanar that makes it's like, it's not reluctant for no reason. It feels more honest with him, and it feels like it like is about this philosophical thing, and it's not just like, I don't know... an old guy being tired of being in the game or something.
Right.
I don't know. It struck me as different, and I liked his relationship to the priestess. And the book is, is a kind of an untouched thing in our conversations, but I feel like this book's very heavily laden with like religious tones and religious imagery, and
100%.
it's very holy. There's lots of talk about like what does it mean to be a holy person? What does it mean to be in a church? Well, I think it's an important through line in this book.
Absolutely. And like, it's funny because I'm watching that Raised by Wolves show on, I think it's on Netflix or something, but and that deals with faith too. And it's a huge piece. And I love the whole, I like the Ivanar thing. And I think you're right, because it's not really like a philosophical thing necessarily for Ivanar, right? I think it's much more born of like pragmatism and realizing that like, look, we're just like killing each other. And I'm good at it, but it's like, pointlessness, the futility aspect of it. So it's not just like a soapbox kind of a thing. You know what I mean?
It's not, it's like, it's a philosophical thing in the way it's like a wisdom thing.
Right.
I mean, it's like, guys.
More like a hard won kind of wisdom than a philosophy.
Yeah. It's not like he has a difference of opinion. Like his difference of opinion is of a different kind. Do you know what I mean?
Right. I love that. And it speaks to, and I love the aspect of it being about kind of acknowledging these other, deities, or just the uncertainty, out there, and just the possibilities and that kind of stuff. And I think it's kind of mirrored in both the Stormwall, what's his name? Heim, and also
Heim rules, one of my favorite parts. Keep going.
Yeah. So, and I love that too. And I think it's mirrored by like Boqeh too, because the assessor guy who
love the Boqeh stuff. So
totally.
Good.
And they're both kind of like peeling away of it. One's kind of, they're both unwilling really. And you know what I mean? Just the kind of whole false dichotomy, or just the whole shenanigans of it being the way that it is, and just having that strict kind of like monotheistic thing borne down on people, and just like basically having to do that at gunpoint. And so I liked how the point of it was like, dude, these things we don't know, and there's all these gods out there, and there's other gods we don't even know. You know what I mean? And just kind of accepting that piece of it. I love that. And then I loved seeing that in the other storylines too.
Quick thing about the Boqeh thing I love how like when you go to the assessor, and it's just like kind of a tone shift, and you like, I guess for me, when you open up the Malazan book and it's like you're around a bunch of soldiers and they're like giving each other shit or something, it's like, this is a familiar scene. This is in a ton of Malazan books, it's in a lot of different ways, a lot of different soldiers, but then when all of a sudden we're like investigating murder and we're doing murder mystery at the beginning of the book, it's like such an interesting tone shift. And I love when the book kind of swerves into almost a different genre type, or like those different elements of the story. Just always appreciate it.
I love that too. And I, the thing I love about the Boqeh thing too is because like I feel like he, it's a hopeful storyline for me, because like if you look at where he's at by the end, he's much more cynical even. You know what I mean? Because
definitely.
Like, he's become jaded, and when he's sitting in that case at the end, and he's like, oh my gosh, and he's like having to adjudicate these stupid petty noble disputes or whatever. But like I know people like the assessor, you know what I mean, like super smart, pass any test and crush and dominate, you know what I mean. But when it just came to, and I forget the Carrion L, the general guy, or the Baron at the end, who was the captain, is always like making fun of him, because it's like, no matter how smart he is, you know what I mean, it's like you can't just like connect the dots on these basic motivations, because he's so smart and he's so pure and he's so by the book and all that. And then like, he ultimately is able to kind of round himself out there after a lot of trials and tribulations. But it's like, we need a lot more Boqehs in society, right? Who are like, we need the smart people, definitely, but we need we need them to kind of do the small stuff too.
To touch back on the religious part of this book, I think something I really appreciated about it, and I'm not here to talk about like my religious life, but I find the 10 very big books, there's religious characters within it, right? Yeah. But I would say largely the books are pretty cynical about religion, I feel, and are pretty. I mean, there's a thorough misanthropy. I don't know. It's a whole statement, but I wouldn't say the book's super. There's not a lot of characters who have faith, and that's simply a part of their lives, Yeah. And I think something I really liked about this book is that faith is just a thing within it, and it is examined from different angles. But it's not just like, oh, there's this church and like organized religion's shitty, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Which is fine and all, and I'm not even disagreeing with any of that. But that type of commentary just, it seems sometimes it doesn't go as deep as I want it to be, and I just enjoyed being in a place and sitting with faith in a different way. So I really appreciated that part of the book and just thinking about what it means to believe, you know, and have belief be a part of your society.
Totally. And the cool thing for me was it wasn't really a, you know, judgment on like Heim or anything like that. Like he was, you know, kind of a G, and we respected him and looked at his leadership skills and even like the way that he got Quint or whatever, kind of to be like, man, you know, after questioning, and he's like, dude, this dude has a quality. You know what I mean? It was just more about like, hey, here's what life proceeds like with, you know, with people who are super fanatically, you know, where that's just like a function of their person. It wasn't like, you know, should they do it or shouldn't they do it or a commentary about it. It was just like, okay, that's like a kind of taken as a given. Now here's how this dude then proceeds through his life and how he interpreted all those, you know, pieces of information, and the deals that he made and stuff was all like, you know, predicated on that stuff. So for me, it was all about just the dynamics of the dude's life, having that be just like the kind of starting point of that person's character.
I agree. I think it's just more well realized around the lady and the other characters in the book, as opposed to sometimes I think in the main series and in other books, like the people who are priests or cleric or these things, it's like a character creation option. Do you mean it's just like, oh, and they do divine magic? Do you mean that's how it feels to me? And not like we're talking about someone who is religious and has faith, you know?
Right. Yeah. And I don't know enough about, you know, Cam or what his kind of philosophy is and stuff like that. But I think it's like kind of, again, encouraging in the same way that like the Bakun stuff is, because, you know, I'm not super religious like that. And, you know, we're at this point in society where I think we're trying to come together more and stuff like that. And I think like, you know, that dude was like a good dude. And, you know, I appreciated being able to find like the humanity in these, like, you know, if you take a step back, these were like crazy religious zealots and stuff, you know what I mean? To the point of like straight up killing and forsaking pretty much everything else to wage eternal war and stuff. But like also like skilled, smart, good dudes, like, you know, too. So I appreciated that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even trying to cast a judgment on it. I just think it's like, this is a more well-realized interpretation is all I feel, you know?
Yeah. No, I was into it.
And I love how the Bakun stuff ends as well, because whenever we just get into like the boring day-to-day of the world, I always kind of get a glee out of it, you know?
Totally. And that's kind of like the back to normal kind of thing that I feel like happens in a lot of the Malazan books. You know, we talked about it in a Toll the Hounds thing too, is that I think like the last thing that happens was like then they get up and go eat breakfast after all this crazy heavy stuff happens. And so yeah, I love that too. And then he's like sitting there like adjudicating these stupid petty cases, and like you can picture him like rolling his eyes and like filing the papers and going, yes, let's hear this next stupid little thing that you're gonna try and scheme to enrich yourself. So it's like it's the morning sunrise scene where they kind of go back to normal and get on with life, and that's kind of a common feature, it seems like.
I know exactly what you mean, kind of putting a button on the whole thing. So I want to, what's something you didn't like about the book, Iskar?
You know, I thought it was a little bit sad how the whole Greymane and Kyle was like a little bit anticlimactic. You know, it was a little bit, obviously a lot of time has passed between the end of Return of the Crimson Guard and when we pick up with Stonewielder. It's been a couple years, but that friendship is a lot tighter, you know, for him to come and be adjunct and to, you know, just kind of, I mean, because if you go back, we get a lot of internal monologue in Return of the Crimson Guard part of Kyle, and he's trepidatious. He's definitely not, I'll beat anybody's ass kind of like overconfidence and stuff. And like he has, again, leveled up in terms of power. The sword helps for sure. And, I think you can kind of justify it if you want to be on board for the books, which I totally am. And I excuse it because it's like, he was best friends with Greymane. And so he's getting all this like free training on how to be totally G'd up with that sword in the first place. But, it is a huge leap, and he just storms those priests who are desiccating people just like by waving their hand and stuff. And that I mean, he gets pretty OP in a way, and that kind of the friendship kind of comes a little bit sudden just from where we left off, and also his skills.
I agree. It's like we kind of talked about at the beginning. It's a change in the characters, and of course you're coming back to characters so part of you wants them to be familiar, right. But I agree. He is not like the, oh, shucks, I just saw Crimson Guard get killed. Oh, no, I'm in the bushes. Like it's a different vibe.
Totally. And like even especially from the other POVs, like Sooth and all, he's almost like revered status by this point in time. And especially after this going forward, it's like he's going to have some serious street creds out there for sure. And for the most part, he's been kind of chilling in a bar for the last couple of years.
For me, well, here's a question. What do you think of this whole setting? Corel, Stormwall, Fist, this whole area is kind of talked about in the main series, in the main 10, but not really is more of alluded to, right? Especially with some of the other stuff in Return of the Crimson Guard.
Yeah.
So what did you make of coming to this subcontinent and just this setting that we don't really see in Erickson's writing?
Yeah, I loved it, and I wish we could have seen it fleshed out a little bit more. For me, I think it was cool seeing how there's this like native tribe element that can fly under the radar even in some ways, and that was like kind of the shaved knuckle this time, was like being able to have those native tribes that were able to Gemmel, I think his name was, who could like access all the warrens and like the kind of Toblachai bloodline element to everything. But I'm a sucker for Stormriders too, which is the other huge part of this book that I really love and want to see fleshed out. But that is I love the content. I loved all the crazy dynamics, and I feel like again this was he stands on his own because he introduced all this new stuff. But I also really want more of it, and just hope he writes more books here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We got to get to the Stormriders soon. When I first read the book, I was like, man, I don't care about this place. Why are we here? Like cool Stormriders exist. Yeah. I don't care about this island, and I don't care that they're like the only reason I guess I care about them is because I guess I care about Stormriders.
Right.
So I think definitely the first time I read it and coming back to it, there's this like a general skepticism that I was like, man, I don't really want to be here. This place is not that interesting to me.
Yeah.
I especially felt that at the beginning of the book. However, I think by the end of the book, I felt more won over I think I care more about this general setting than most of the characters within it. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
I find it to be a very compelling place to be, more so than I think I particularly love some of the people in it. Although I care a bit about some of the characters.
I like it because I think it's, well developed in terms of like, advanced civilization compared to other continents. It's like they had a pretty like dialed in, legal system and judicial system. And like they had a whole functioning criminal underworld that was kind of cool. And they're kind of like the underdogs who've just been constantly, getting screwed over. And actually the other cool thing that I like about this, which I only picked up on this time through, was, which I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in like the prologue and stuff with the first guy who discovers the chunks or whatever of the lady when the that I think those were like Jakuruku like expeditioners, you know what I mean? Like those are like the conquistadors of like I think Calor's old empire, and so that was like the one Calor tie-in, I think, unless I I totally screwed that up. But I just noticed at this time that they were on their like little crusades or expeditions from Jakuruku from way back in the day. I think that's where those boats that originally landed there were coming from.
That's very interesting. I didn't put that together, but I think that makes sense to me.
So yeah, I like that area, but again, I want to see it fleshed out. I want to know how come there's Toblachai there, right? That have native blood and all of that stuff. That to me is really interesting.
I kind of love that in Esselman's book. This is the second one now. That Toblachai are because obviously when you talk Toblachai, really isn't there kind of this impression we're just talking about Karsa?
Yes,
do you know what I mean?
100%.
So it's I kind of really like getting to, it's like, well, no, it's like just giant people. It's like here there's just the giants and we have some other giants around. Do you know what I mean? And I kind of almost prefer reading them in these like, that aren't the Toblachai, but are in this greater tree. It's, I don't know. I kind of like how they're kind of their own thing in this series.
I do too, and I love how there was like other ones too, because I think the Stormwall, there was that Hagen guy or whatever at the end where he hooks up Shell or something. But yeah, but there's just like multiple different floating around, and it's like you don't know if they're like Toblachai, Taranthal, like those names are all so, nebulous, it seems like to me, and they're all kind of have a common thread of like this overconfidence, which I guess if you're 9 feet tall and just super yoked, you're going to be pretty confident, but but they're kind of just all characters too, you know what I mean? So I'm always.
No, yeah, I agree. Can I just take this time that we're kind of getting to the Stormwall of it all?
Yeah.
I just want to confess, I've never liked Iron Bars, and I don't like it when he's in the books. This is my dark Malazan secret.
Oh my gosh. We heard it here, folks. He's on the record.
Yeah, it's just not my cup of tea. I think Corlo's great. Love it when Corlo's around,
Yeah. No, I like Corlo too. Poor Corlo, like really, he's the one who ends up a little worse for wear at the end of this, but I'm not exact opposite. I love Bars.
Corlo's having a hard time in this book. And I have other characters I feel similarly to. Characters that are super strong and don't have a lot of failures and kind of win most fights they get in.
Yeah.
And it's like, even if they win by just the bare of their teeth, I don't know. It's just, they're not really my cup of tea. I find them less compelling. And I just think that's kind of why I bounce off Iron Bars. So I've always felt that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Iron Bars is hugely flawed because look at him. He totally became like an emotional basket case and totally shut down. And like, yeah, he's a badass and he was beating all those Stormriders down. But, he was pretty jacked up too. And like, actually, arguably, even though I know Corlo's going to be the one to, take it on the chin judgment wise, he, Bars and his giving up and just totally, not caring and just descending into madness basically could arguably be, a lot of those, the people of his blade could be laid at his feet in the same way that like Corlo not telling him soon enough and getting him snapped out and all that is obviously going to be laid at his.
I think he is more interesting in this book than the books I've read him before in, but I think the fandom has a lot of Bars love and I've never been on that page, but I get what you're saying, and I did find it interesting.
The legend of Bars is dope because like about even like his story of getting to the Stormwall, it was like he was just so savagely tearing apart all the assaults and whatever that they ended up just having to like burn the entire boat down and then waiting for like him to just be like swimming around, just to even be able to capture him. And like there's something endearing about like the kind of Bars is basically the Deadpool of the Malazan world.
I feel that's more like Iskar Pust, maybe a Krupp, but I kind of get what you're saying in that way.
Just in the indestructible way.
Yeah. So before we move too far on, we should talk about Heim, the Stormriders, the Stormwall. Of course, like, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, it's the thrust of the book, right? The finale's kind of about the Stormwall breaking, about the Stormriders. Like, I don't know. the book's scope is larger than that, but it's certainly the centerpiece of the book. So what did you think about learning more about the Stormriders? We don't learn everything. And of course, this huge finale. There's Stormguard. I think the Stormguard are so cool. I think Haim's a really interesting character.
Yes.
I know he's like kind of a villain, right?
I mean, yeah, I guess that's like the takeaway, right? Is that he was a shill for the wrong side.
Yeah, I don't know. He definitely is not the greatest dude, but I really enjoyed reading him, and every time we were like in the Stormwall with those people, I was having a blast. I found their storyline pretty compelling.
Me too. And say whatever you want about Haim and religious fanatics and stuff, but like that dude had integrity, right? And integrity is like having a code and sticking to it and living by it, and he definitely did that. Having dignity is like being worthy of respect, and so he was kind of shilling for the wrong ultimate goal, and that's tragic and unfortunate, and actually drove him to chuck himself out the window at the end when he realizes that is what was going down. I thought that kind of pissed me off, honestly, just because.
Yeah, I didn't love that, but to me it just feels like we needed to clean up the end of the story, and it's like, okay, well, I guess that's the end of. Do you mean I think it would have been more interesting for me to learn more about what that means to him actually? Do you know what I mean?
I would have loved to see like the throw down the sword moment and be like, you know what? Hey, young bucks, I've like spent all this time, and like a lot of the story's been about learning about how I am honorable and, have integrity and all this stuff. But then like once I find out I've been being used and abused, then deuces, we're out of here. Let's go make amends or something like that. He was just like, nope, I'm outie. And so which, I mean, gosh, that had to have been a gut punch. And that is like, there's like an underpinning of commentary there, obviously. But yeah, you would have wanted to see him like more, a little bit spit in the eye or thumb in the eye or something, be a little more pissed off about it.
Yeah, I just think, I think I was praising the book for having a more rich religious setting here, but I think in moments like that I feel a little let down. I'm like, okay, I guess this is it, but I also understand, I don't feel like he's the central character of the book, and I don't think, I also recognize, I feel like there's this self-contained aspect to the book, but although that's not super true, because the other characters just are left in kind of, I guess Ivanar's going off to build a monastery, he's doing his own thing, and I gotta tell you, knowing what I know about Malazan, I'm pretty sure I'll never read this character again, so.
I wish I could say read and find out, but no, yeah, and I can kind of excuse it because it's almost unnecessary. Like, you didn't need Haim to fulfill that purpose, because ultimately about like 45 minutes later, and he saw the writing on the wall too, and maybe that was like what made it so poignant, was that he was just like, dude, this is done, and he looked around and was like, you know what, like this is whether people come to grips with it or not, that's a wrap, and jump out the window, because then the whole wall and the lady and all that, I mean, that all gets upended, and the Stormriders chunk her to bits or whatever, and that's that.
So now that we see more of the Stormriders, and of course it's like, oh, they were misunderstood, they were like kind of on this different side, they aren't these just sea devils, What do you think of these Stormriders now that we get a bit more of a picture of them?
I wish I had a better sense of them still, because like
they are still elusive, right?
Totally. Like, we see that they're not malicious, and they had all those moments where, they would like cruise up on their wave, and then they would like see Shell or Ironbar and be like, yeah, you're a badass. And they'd like salute and just bail out and stuff. And so there is like an honorable component. So they're not just like these bloodthirsty killers. That part is clear, but we still have no real sense of what the ultimate goal is. And I still go back to the Knight and Knives stuff that we talked about, where that was like the third kind of undercurrent, behind all the other stories, was the kind of like them kind of fending off the Stormriders. And there is like this, I think they called it like a malevolent like chunk down there or something, this like presence or whatever. So it's like, it's just, I want to know what motivates them, what's the origin story, and they're great characters, like every Malazan character group that there is, but I really thirst for more.
I'm really relieved, totally someone random thought. So, of course we learned that Greymane has this whole history with the Stormriders and
right.
like about Stonewielder, but I love at the beginning of the book when he's like, oh yeah, I have this ancient name, And then we start the book, and, he's actually going by... I was right about to call him Dejem Nebrolf.
Origin Samar.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I got my wires crossed. Yeah, and he's Origin Samar for, like, a second or so, right?
Yeah.
And it's like so often Malazan characters have like 7 names, and I'm glad the book quickly dispenses with calling him Origin, and he's like, okay, I'm going back to Greymane. You can just call me that. So quick side note.
Well, and I think that was supposed to be a reveal in Path to Ascendancy too, because and it worked because I was totally spacing on the name Origin when I read it. So
yeah, I do think. Well, I haven't read that book, but. This brings me, we kind of touched on the Stormwall, a fun setting. Let's get to, in my mind, I don't know how you feel, the single best plot line in this book. And to me, the one that, like, I am easily the most excited about. And maybe this speaks to kind of my lack of investment in some of the characters in the book and in Stormwall. But when we are with Kiska and Leoman on their journey and through all these adventures, it is like just, I don't know, man, just, it is hot fire. I'm just having a blast. It is like a kicking guitar solo, just loving the whole thing. There's this first off, Kiska's quest is awesome. It's great. And we're in these high magical places, seeing all this fun stuff, right? And we're in these, it's just, the setting's awesome. And then furthermore, there's this element where first off, even when I read the book the first time, I knew it was Leoman. Do you know what I mean?
Did you? Yeah, I didn't.
To me, it was. I often miss a bunch of stuff in these books, but it was very clear to me that was Leoman.
Counselor Moonspawn knew it right off the bat too. She just finished this as well.
Yeah, it just to me, it was blindingly obvious, which I know some people say about other stuff, and I always like chafe at. But to me, So playing this game about who Leoman is, what is his motivations. And just, especially I'm reading Bone Hunters now for the main show, I love Leoman. I love him as a character and find him so interesting. And he exemplifies the type of character you like love to hate. You know what I mean?
Totally. And she even loved to hate him too.
Yeah, and I just think they make a great adventuring pair, and they're dynamic. And the ending of the book with them is so fucking great. And that's like the thing that got me most jived to go forward. Do you mean Essentially, in my mind, I would just, like, if the next book was just about that, I would be just as stoked. I know it's not, but still. So, are you as stoked on this Kiska stuff as I am?
Oh, yeah. I'm here for Kiska. I was down for even in Night of Knives and stuff, because, like, I think she's the adolescent that's pulled off best, honestly, even better than Kyle and Crocus for sure. But, she has definitely come into her own, and she, like I said, she's matured, but she's not totally mature. And I love that we go to Emerlon, right? I love that we're seeing demons and just like crazy shadow spawn and stuff. I love the whole bit in the Army of Lights, like encampment. I especially love that she's there to like witness Laura get his nose broken and his sister kind of punk him in front of everybody. And that was like really fun too. But I love their relationship, because I think that feels like a real relationship. They're both flawed people, right? They're both kind of like cocky and overconfident, making assumptions and misunderstanding each other, and that's how they ultimately end up coming to like a common understanding. So yeah, no, I'm 100% all in for it.
I just want to touch on, since you mentioned their appearance in this book, like Crippled God finale, Tis Leosian.
Yes.
Is my least favorite Tis Leosian,
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. I don't have that much of beef. But compared to where they are here, or like their appearance in House of Chains, do you mean? This is the Tis Leosian that I find so fun. And it's like I'm having a great time being around them. And that's not only to say that, like, I think, of course, in House of Chains, they're purely played for laughs,
Right.
But here, I just still find them interesting. And I almost think maybe it's just because they're withheld and I'm being interested in what I don't know. But sometimes I feel I'm more interested in the Leosian than the Andy or the Eater.
I just think they're so, well, they're their patron god or whatever, a Cirque, I think it's all stems from that. And, I have a lot of beef there, but I just think it's so funny that they're just so all, direct or literal or whatever. It's like, hey, there's this big world. It's like, hey, what we do is we mass mad troops and we just go take it on. And some of us get our noses busted and whatever, but that's what it is. And so they're just so blunt, I guess, is their approach. And that's kind of what makes it cool. They're just all rough edges.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there's a combination of like kind of condescending patronism, like we're better than you, and also like kind of being idiots and just blunt and like getting their nose hit, as you said. I mean,
totally. I wish Brother Jarud would have been back from Return of the Crimson Guard to get totally, smacked around by Skinner again, because like that's like, Brother Jarud's legacy of the Tis Leosin is to get clowned, I think.
Yes, that's like his main thing, and that's why Jarud's one of the best characters.
I love Brother Jarud, yeah.
You mentioned Skinner. Single best line of the book, at the end of the book, when he gets away, it's like Skinner with like 6 N's, and it's like, Skinner!
Oh, yeah, 100%. Dude, if you yell out Skinner like that, that's how you find out if people have read the Ice books or not.
You read that line, and I instantly, it's just, first off, it's kind of stupid, right? Because it's like, this shouldn't be as effective as it is, But like, I see all those ends, and it's there, and I'm like, it just puts me right there, and it's drawing upon that, like, it's almost Wrath of Khan. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And we're just, he got away. Skinner!
Totally. And if you're not picturing the Principal Skinner from The Simpsons when he does that, then you're doing it wrong.
There is a bit of Simpsons energy, I was almost hesitant to bring it up, but it's inevitable.
Yeah, 100%. No, I love that line. And it was like, that was the big supposed climax, and then he just like steps back at the last minute, and then it's like, shoot. And then it's like, we'll maybe see what happens with that next season.
Maybe.
That's the kind of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire cliffhanger or whatever when they go to commercial break. Then they're like, we'll find out after the break.
No, it is. Yeah. All right. So before we talk about kind of bigger picture stuff about these Esselman books, I just want to quick read some comments we got about people's impressions of Rian Stonewielder. Here's one from the P. I don't have a question. Just want to say Stonewielder is easily my favorite of the Esselman books. He lets us see in detail so much of what has been teased by Erikson in Book of the Fallen. Stratum, Coral, Fist, Stormriders, Greymane, Ipshank, and Manask. Love him. It also ties in so well with the meta-narrative of Steve's books, with the pieces of the lady being fragments of the crippled god, and how it's the driving force for the Stormriders, which up until this book I had found to be out of place and pointless, serving only as a device to isolate Coral from the central Malazan Empire.
Absolutely. No, I love that take on it. And actually, I was like, that's like sparking all these thoughts. And I was like, started daydreaming hearing that, because I think like maybe the crippled god is the main motivation for the Stormriders throughout the stuff. But no, I agree on the Esselmont stuff. And we were even talking about it in the Discord. It's just that he has a really fun reading style, and for me, I just I enjoyed it, and I think the Stormriders piece was one piece of it, but I enjoyed it all.
Someone calls it the best sea landing since D-Day. Boom boom.
Wow. I love it. Yeah, I don't know. For me, I thought the bog down over the riverbank was, that was frustrating. But no, I get the feels for the invasion. That was just, it had very, I wish I knew the name of the song, but the Apocalypse Now kind of like bombing song kind of vibe to it.
Ride of the Valkyries.
There we go.
Here's a comment from Cannibal Crusader. I enjoyed it quite a bit, as I really liked seeing more of the world we hadn't visited before. Coral and Storwall come up enough in the series that I was very intrigued to see more of this place. It was fun enough to see the Stormriders and the Moranth, as well as the continuation of some of the Crimson Guard rescuing Iron Bars and others on the wall. We didn't even talk about the Moranth. Like, they're like in this book, full bore. Anyway, I also really liked some of the horror elements, which I think Ice is always great at writing. Surrounding the Blessed Lady and the Mage Usu. The scene where Usu and Uel find out that Greymane is coming back from their prisoner is very creepy, as are the scenes where Usu grabs a hold of the prisoner's heart to use his magic and commune with the lady. I wasn't a huge fan of Kyle in Return of the Crimson Guard, and he was better here, but he also feels like a completely different character. Maybe that's just due to his growth growth after the events of this book, but it felt out of place to me. I enjoyed Bakun and Ipshank as characters, and Manask provided some good humor.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what he said there. You know?
Yeah, I like Manask. I think that he does a lot of good humor, which is the other part that I didn't mention. But, you know, I like that part. That's the other reason why I like the squad stuff, because I just like the like ribbing of each other constantly. But, you know, what the other thing about the Stormwall and thinking about, you know, the main series and the tie-ins and all that is it reminds me a lot of like the Ferret Sort side, right? Like, can you imagine her being the kind of religious fanatic, you know, like that would basically be reporting into Quint? Like that was her jam, right before when we meet her.
It's really interesting. I'm just and I mentioned Star and Bone Hunters now, and it's like I just read the Ferret and Sword introduction. Of course, it's interesting to see her story start, and it's interesting to see it read it like it's almost like I came with her from Stormwall.
Yeah, because you just left Coral. Yeah.
Like legitimately, I like just put down the book Coral, and even on the show they were like, they're from this Stormwall place, and I'm like, yeah, there's a whole book about it, guys.
Totally. Which is kind of weird, right? Because if you read her character, like she seems like, I mean, you know, she is definitely a tight ass. There's no doubt about it. You know what I mean? And that part definitely shines through. But just like being the true believer side of it, you know, and maybe she learned about that. But it's fun to think about.
Here's a hot praise. Favorite ice book. This is from Falso Movimento.
Wow.
Favorite ice book and one of my top 10 Malazan books in general. Coral on the Wall make up for incredibly atmospheric and unique setting. The book has a wide range of great characters and is tightly plotted, but it still deals with some serious themes and is an introspective writing style. One of my favorite endings of the series as well.
This could potentially be like a video or like a movie or whatever, like a visual adaptation starting point, right? Because you could like start here and then you could like back off and go back in time to Book of the Fallen and like flesh out and have it like be a tangential, but it could also be like a standalone thing if it totally sucks. So
yeah, I don't know if this would really be a standalone way, but I don't know. I'm glad the guy loves it. You know, I'm only here to support. You know, you know, I'm not like, you know,
we're just spitballing here, Pete. It's okay.
Here's one. I'm rereading the Ice. This is from I Am Misif. I am rereading the Ice books now, and I've liked them all better the second time through. I agree this book is fine. I appreciate getting to see more of the world and more cultures we haven't seen elsewhere. I like where it ends up, but it starts rough. The editing is still a bit of a mess in this book, and there's character stuff that just doesn't feel right. Kyle and Greymane seem to completely flip roles, going from green to competent, and from competence to being a real sad sack. I was sad to see Jumpy not make the jump to this book, but Suth was a worthwhile character to follow, at least compared to Bendon and Orb Scepter Throne. Overall, it's better than Return of the Crimson Guard, but definitely below the next two books.
I miss Jumpy. I liked Jumpy after all the like trash talking, and he kind of starts as this not totally reprehensible, but just like, come on, bro, you know. And then, you know, I ended up liking him, and he shows some leadership, and he steps up with those new recruits in the squad. I would have loved to see Jumpy be like kind of the, you know, in the same way that if Kyle can step up and become like the adjutant to the whole entire division, then like Jumpy could have at least been like the head of, you know, the squad or something in Sooth's division, but that would have been super cool.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's tough because I think Esselmont's just trying to do something different, but I do wish more characters directly followed from Return of the Crimson Guard.
Jumpy had that reluctant hero thing too, because he was like, dude, you know, and then he ended up having to like mentor these kids and stuff. He could have fit in there.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think it's just they're doing something different. I mean, some characters come over. It's not an entirely fresh slate, but
I'm just greedy. You know, I want to see everybody cross over.
Yeah. All right. Here's my last comment, and then we'll talk big picture. This one's from Flipmeister. Stonewielder is in my top 3 of the Esselmont books, with Orb, Scepter Throne, and Deadhouse Landing. It's been a while since I read it, but I think it really is Ice at his best. Kind of tight and focused story. Greymane is the main character, horror elements, and the Crimson Guard scheming. He's best when he gets to write about things that are related to the actual Empire, but is still his own thing. Whenever him and Erickson overlap, the difference in style and in quality becomes too jarring for me. For the Ice books, which I don't like, Blood and Bone and Assail has the first problem, and Return of the Crimson Guard and Kellenvad's Reach has the second. Stonewielder feels like a natural inclusion in the Malaz universe. Finally gives some well-executed world-building on the famed Coral and Stormwell, is a nice continuation of Malik Rel's tenure as Emperor, and providing a satisfying conclusion to the Greymane story. Yeah, I agree with I mean, obviously he's speaking in a broader way about some stuff I haven't read.
Sure.
But
No,
yeah.
I like the take on it. You know, I think that it is a kind of it's part of the broader universe. You know, like you said, it has the tie in with characters, places, stuff that we've heard about. But I also like that it's kind of like, again, I go back to what I said at the very beginning, where it was like the first time I realized that it wasn't just a companion series, because it's, you know, these are tangential references that were made, but they don't have a ton of consequence to the subsequent books if you put this in publication order or reading order or whatever, and did this after Dust of Dreams. You know, and none of the characters cross over that much in a major consequential way, and so it is definitely fleshing out more of the map, more of the lore and all of that stuff. But I thought this was the first one, and actually, especially after watching the AP Canavan interview where he talked to Esselman about how they kind of divvied up the characters and stuff like that. Like, this really did feel like Esselman writing about his characters that he gamed and loved and cared about, that they kind of decided to split at the very beginning. And for that I loved it.
Yeah, I agree. I mentioned it earlier, I don't think the tie-in is loose. And if you're coming for the tie-in, you're going to be a little let down, maybe.
Right.
You know. But let's talk about it in its big scheme. So I would love to hear your thoughts. But for me, I think, first off, I do think, although I like this book less than Return of the Crimson Guard, I think Esselman only improves as a writer. I think it's a better, just put together in better ways in almost every aspect.
Yeah.
And we're still in this first three that I have read before.
Yes.
So I'm really keen to get into Orb Scepter Throne. I was telling you before we started recording that it's been years before I've read like a fresh Malazan book. So it's something new, a whole new world, and that's going to be really interesting for me. But revisiting this book, as I said, was definitely really worth it. I think I was glad to come back to it kind of knowing what I was going to get and knowing that I wasn't here for an expansion of the lore, like an expansion of the main series. So, yeah, I had a good time. I think it's probably, I probably like the other two we've read more, but solid book. Wouldn't, you know,
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel super strong about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I love this book. I love them all. You know what I mean? You're not going to ever find me talk bad about any of them. I really enjoy everything. This isn't my favorite of the Ice books. I think that for me, the one that we're getting into, and I joke that Stonewielder could be an entry point, but I think like Orb Scepter Throne could potentially be a standalone and just be an epic movie. So I'm so excited to talk to you about that. And I think that one, and for me, the Blood and Bone, there's a lot of tie-ins to the main series on a philosophical level that I think are going to be really fun to talk about. So for me, I think that my top four would be Return of the Crimson Guard, probably like a, mid-tier, but then I really like Orb Scepter Throne, Blood and Bone, Assail, and then I have like kind of Stonewielder and Return of the Crimson Guard together, and then Knight of Knives. So it's going to be fun from here on out, man.
You feel like it's only ramping up.
I think it's only going to get better and better from here, and a lot of action, a lot of philosophy, a lot of the lasers and fireballs and feels and all the stuff that we go to Malazan for.
I'm looking forward to it, and I feel like, it's kind of interesting to read these Esselman books the way we're doing it. I think it's turning out all right. I think it's, I don't know, it's just, I live in this weird world now where maybe you feel this way. I think about these books, I read about the books. It's just, they take up a lot more space than I guess I thought they would, and now we're deep. I'm deep into the show, and now it's even more. Now there's this whole Esselman piece to it. It's pretty interesting to have this kind of side series going with you.
Yeah, no, I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and it's a much bigger, piece of my life than I ever thought it was gonna be, and it's a like crazy time to be alive, because it's it's a lot of cool stuff that we take back to our real lives, and there's like that's why I love it. There's all the layers. It's like the onion, right? On the surface, it's the lasers and the fireballs and the iron bars and the all that stuff, and then you get the religion and the all that who's really the bad guy. So yeah, no, I'm appreciating it, man.
Yeah, so I'm really just looking forward to going back to Darujistan and Orb Scepter Throne and kind of getting away and getting into something new, you know?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll go back to Genebacus and we'll kick around our old stomping grounds, and there's lots of lore and action and backstory, so I think you're going to love it. I can't wait to hear what you think.
All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us here. We're going to be talking about Orb Scepter Throne in about 2 months or so. That should be about the schedule we're looking for, and we look forward to talking to you then. As always, thanks to Humble Goat, who made this wonderful art we have. Links to her bio and her coffee page are in her description. Let us know what you think of the show at 10 Very Big Folks on Twitter and Gmail. And absolutely, go to ISKAR JARAK's YouTube page. He's just cranking out the hits. I mean, listen.
Thank you, Peter.
The thing is this. Sometimes I forget to plug this stuff because I just kind of feel like if you're listening to this episode and you're at the end, I'm pretty sure you know what's going. Like, I don't know. You're in the fandom. You know what's going on. Do you know what I mean?
So, you're always welcome.
All right. Anything else? I think we covered all the bases.
No, I think we nailed it. I had so much fun, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me back.
Awesome. Look forward to talking to you again. See ya.
See ya.
Hello, everybody. AJ here, producer and editor of 10 Very Big Books. Thank you so much for listening to the third episode of Discussions of the Malazan Empire. Special shout out as well to ISKAR JARAK for taking this journey with Peter. It's always great to have him on the show, and we are really loving doing this series with him. You can check him out on YouTube, youtube.com/ISKAR JARAK. He also has a Discord server, subreddit, Facebook page, Patreon, and merch store, all of which will be linked in the show notes. If you'd like to join 10 Very Big Books Discord, you can head on over to bit.ly/VBB Discord. That's capital V, capital B, capital B, capital D, Iskord. That link will also be in the show notes, along with the link to our Patreon, patreon.com/10verybig books, if you'd like to support the show there. This series and all of our bonus content is made possible by our wonderful patrons, so thank you all so much for allowing us to do more and continue to grow the show. Of course, I want to thank my good friend Boqeh for allowing us to use his song Winter off of his album Demos and Singles 2016-2020. You can follow him on Twitter at Brendan Bigley and check out his podcast that I also produce over on intothecast.online. And finally, a huge, gigantic thanks to my favorite D&D father, Scout Wilkinson, for making our absolutely incredible episode art. You can check out more of her work on Twitter at HumbleGoat and on her coffee page, ko-fi.com/HumbleGoat. All of those links, of course, will be in the show notes. And Pete and Iskar will be back in a couple of months with the next Discussions of the Malazan Empire, where they'll be talking about Orb Scepter Throne by Ian Cameron Esselmont. I'll talk to you then. And thank you so much for listening.